Imagine walking into a dealership in 1958, ready to buy the most luxurious Pontiac money can buy, the stunning Parisian. You pop the hood expecting Pontiac power, and instead you find a Chevrolet 348 V8 staring back at you. Brand new, first year of production, in Pontiac's flagship. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some shady dealer swap. This came straight from the factory. Oh, and one more thing. You couldn't buy this car in the United States even if you wanted to. This beauty was Canada only, baby. Stop laughing. This is real automotive history. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the weirdest factory combinations General Motors ever created. The 1958 Pontiac Parisian with a Chevrolet 348 V8. Now, if you're American, you've probably never heard of the Parisian. That's because it didn't exist in the US market. This was Canada's exclusive luxury Pontiac, sitting at the very top of the lineup, dripping in chrome, loaded with style, and absolutely gorgeous. But, and this is where it gets wild, Canadian Pontiacs were fundamentally different cars than their American cousins. We're talking Pontiac bodies riding on Chevrolet chassis with Chevrolet engines, Chevrolet transmissions, and even Chevrolet pedals. And in 1958, they dropped in Chevy's brand new 348 cubic inch V8, an engine so fresh that most mechanics had never even seen one yet. So buckle up, because we're about to explore why Canadian Pontiacs were bizarre hybrids, what made the 348 special, and why this particular combination has become one of the most fascinating oddities in GM history. Let's get one thing straight. Canadian Pontiacs were not American Pontiacs with a maple leaf slapped on them. These were fundamentally different automobiles, and it all came down to economics and market realities. Here's the deal. In Canada during the 1950s, Pontiac was actually the volume leader, not Chevy. Yeah, you heard that right. Pontiac outsold Chevy north of the border. But Canada was a smaller market with higher production costs, plus there were import duties, restrictions, and quotas to deal with. So GM Canada had a brilliant, or depending on your perspective, completely insane idea. Why not build Pontiacs using Chevrolet chassis, engines, and transmissions? Share the components, share the assembly lines, cut costs dramatically, and give Canadian buyers the prestige of a Pontiac at a more reasonable price. This strategy had been in place since 1949, so by 1958, it was standard operating procedure. Canadian buyers got Pontiac's beautiful styling and luxurious interiors, but underneath, pure Bowtie DNA. Chevrolet frames, Chevrolet engines, including that 235 cubic inch cylinder in the base models, and Chevrolet's Powerglide automatic transmission instead of Pontiac's Hydra-Matic. But, and here's where it gets interesting, Canadian Pontiacs also got access to a special engine that Americans couldn't get unless they were buying a medium-duty truck, the 261 cubic inch inline six. It was basically an enlarged version of Chevy's 235, and it became standard equipment in Canadian Pontiacs. Now, the 1958 Chevrolets rode on a 117.5-inch wheelbase. That was 2.5 inches longer than the 57 models. American Pontiacs, on the other hand, rode on either 121-inch or 124-inch wheelbases, depending on whether you got a short wheelbase Catalina or a long wheelbase Bonneville. Here's where it gets funky. The Parisian used the Bonneville's gorgeous side trim, but it was actually built on the Catalina body riding on that 117.5-inch Chevrolet wheelbase. The result? The wheels weren't even centered in the wheel arches. Yeah, it was visually off. But honestly, most people never noticed because the styling was so spectacular that your eyes were too busy taking in all that chrome. Curiosity loop. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like a cost-cutting disaster, but wait until you see what engine option Pontiac Canada offered in 1958. It was Chevrolet's secret weapon, and it was about to change everything. All right, let's talk about the star of our show. The Chevrolet 348 cubic inch V8. Before 1958, if you wanted serious displacement from Chevrolet, you were out of luck. The small block 283 was fantastic, legendary even, but Chevy needed something bigger to compete with Ford's big mills and provide real torque for their full-size cars and trucks. So they created the W Series engine, and they made it weird. The 348 featured scalloped valve covers, and there was a reason for that unusual design. The valves were arranged in an up and down fashion, kind of offset, which allowed the engineers to make the engine block physically shorter. This meant better packaging in tight engine bays. This wasn't your typical V8 architecture. Chevrolet was experimenting here, trying something completely different from what eventually would become their famous big block design. The W Series was its own beast. And here's the thing, 1958 was the inaugural year. This engine was brand new. We're talking fresh off the drawing board new. The 348 would continue through 1965 and eventually spawn the legendary 409 cubic inch V8, the one the Beach Boys sang about. But in 1958, this was unproven technology. The 348 came in multiple configurations. The base 4-barrel version made 250 horsepower, solid power for the era. But if you wanted to get really crazy, you could option up to the super turbo thrust with 3 2-barrel carburetors, and that setup pushed out serious power. For 1958, that was absolutely bonkers for a street car. The engine featured a cast-iron block, forged crank, and was built tough enough for truck duty or high-performance applications. It had that deep-breathing, authoritative Chevrolet V8 sound that made people respect you at stoplights. Therefore, when this engine showed up in the 1958 Pontiac Parisian, you got something truly bizarre. Canada's luxury flagship, powered by Chevrolet's first-year experimental big-displacement V8. Curiosity loop. But here's the question nobody asks. If Canadian Pontiacs were all about cost-cutting and economy, why offer this thirsty V8? The answer reveals something fascinating about Canadian car culture. Now, let's talk about the car itself, because the 1958 Pontiac Parisian was absolutely stunning. This wasn't just another trim level. This was the top-of-the-line Pontiac in Canada, positioned above even the Laurentine, Stratochief, and Pathfinder. Americans couldn't buy one. This was exclusive to Canada and select export markets. And wow, did GM Canada make it special. First, let's talk about that front end. What an authoritative face. You've got a wall-to-wall grille embedded with loop-style brightwork trim, emphasizing the sheer width of this beast. Quad headlamps, which, by the way, became legal in all 50 states for the first time in 1958. That's why you see so many 57 cars with just 2 headlights. The headlamp bezels are beautifully echoed in the parking lights and turn signal indicators embedded in the grille. Then you've got those aircraft-inspired strakes on top of the fenders, terminating in gorgeous pieces of brightwork. And that hood? It's a masterpiece. There's this distinctive crease that gets more pronounced as it flows toward the front before fading over the leading edge. Plus, there's a beautiful concave surface at the bottom that echoes the scallop section in the quarter panels. Now rotate to the side, and this is where the Parisian really shines. You've got this incredible rocket form body side trim that starts way back at the quarter panel, creating a white trail trimmed in brightwork against the copper-colored body. That rocket nose extends the entire length of the car, and tucked underneath the tip, you'll find a little Parisian script. Here's what's cool about the trim hierarchy. The Parisian got everything. 4 fake vents behind the front wheels, the full rocket, 4 stars embedded in the scalloped-out section. Go down 1 level to the Laurentine, you lost the 4 vents, and you only got 3 stars instead of 4. It's like Buick's Ventaport strategy, where the expensive models had 4 and the cheaper ones only had 3. Drop down to the Stratochief, you lost the rocket entirely, still had the stars, but no rocket. And the entry-level Pathfinder? No stars, no rocket, no nothing, just clean body sides. It was badge engineering through subtraction. The Parisian also featured that big wraparound front glass that was so popular in the 50s, a wraparound backlight, and this beautiful arcing roofline that GM did better than Ford. Ford often went with a 3-box design, but GM always had this gentle arc, and on the 58 Parisian, It's dramatically pronounced. One cool detail: the roof panel and brightwork don't extend all the way through that basket handle rear section. They break partway through the C-pillar. It's a subtle touch that really works. Out back, you've got chrome everywhere. The bumper, trim around the taillights, reverse lamps, Pontiac block lettering, huge strakes on the deck lid, maybe an homage to Pontiac's classic silver streak, and a fake air extractor on the roof, just like the '58 Impala. Oh, and here's a fun detail. Where's the fuel filler? It's hidden behind the driver's side reverse light, which swings out to reveal the gas cap. You'd never guess it was there. Clever design. A curiosity loop. So we've got this gorgeous luxury barge loaded with chrome, but wait until you see the interior, because Pontiac went absolutely wild with the brightwork and attention to detail. Step inside the Parisienne and you're immediately hit with one of the most richly detailed interiors of the era. Take a look at those door panels, brightwork adorning the top portion that flows seamlessly into the instrument panel. This was an early attempt at creating harmony between the dash and doors, making the interior feel like one cohesive space. That design philosophy would disappear for decades before coming back into vogue in the 1990s and 2000s. The color combination here is absolutely spectacular. Very mid-century modern, very late 50s glamour. Now, eagle-eyed viewers will notice something. The accelerator and brake pedals are borrowed straight from Chevrolet, not Pontiac. Because remember, underneath, this is a Chevrolet chassis. But check out those strakes on the door panels that continue into the rear seat area, creating visual harmony. Those strakes are mimicked in the seat stitch patterns and even in the door pull armrests. It ties the interior together and connects it to the exterior theme, especially those strakes we saw on the deck lid. And then we have the instrument panel. Oh man, this thing is gorgeous. You've got a slight hood over beautifully round gauges, mixing round forms with linear elements, all tied together with a ton of brightwork. It doesn't get much better than this. Sharp-eyed viewers will spot the Power Glide shift quadrant, PRNDL, because this has Chevrolet's Power Glide, not Pontiac's Hydra-Matic. Interestingly, Canadian Pontiacs didn't offer any other automatic besides Power Glide. Americans could get Pontiac's Hydra-Matic or even the experimental Turbo Glide, but Canadians? Just Power Glide. Honestly, that was probably smart. That big, heavy cast-iron Power Glide was bulletproof, reliable, robust. Sure, it had that characteristic soft hum in park or neutral, but that was just part of the car's character. This interior is pure 50s luxury, rich, detailed, and unapologetically opulent. Curiosity loop. So we've got this gorgeous styling, the luxurious interior, and now we're about to pop the hood on the real star of the show, that first-year Chevrolet 348 V8. All right, here we go. Pop the hood on this copper beauty, and there it is, the Chevrolet 348 cubic inch V8. This was the inaugural year, 1958, and this engine would soldier on through 1965, eventually giving birth to the legendary 409. But in '58, this was cutting edge. Now, the engine lineup in Canadian Pontiacs was interesting. Standard equipment was that 261 cubic inch six-cylinder we talked about earlier. Then you could option up to a 283 V8 with either a 2-barrel or 4-barrel carburetor. And finally, sitting at the top of the heap was this 348. The 348 came in two configurations, 4-barrel carbureted making 250 horsepower, or the wild tri-power setup with three 2-barrel carburetors making significantly more power. This particular car has the 4-barrel version, 250 horses, which was serious power in 1958. Now, look at those scalloped valve covers. That's not just for show. The valve train was offset, with valves arranged in that up and down fashion we talked about earlier, which made the block shorter for better packaging. Here's the reality check. This engine was super rare in Canadian cars. Why? Gas was expensive in Canada, even back in the late 50s and early 60s. It was always pricier than in the States. So most Canadian buyers opted for smaller, more economical engines. The six-cylinder was far more common than any V8. And when buyers did spring for a V8, they usually went with the 283, not the thirsty 348. Finding Canadian cars with optional engines is genuinely difficult. They're rare survivors. To put this in perspective, a 1970 Impala sold in Canada with the 454 big block, only about 40 were sold that year. 40! Finding Canadian cars with big engines is like finding a needle in a haystack. So this 1958 Parisienne with the 348, this is a legitimate unicorn, a first-year engine in a Canada-only luxury car that most buyers couldn't afford to feed. But, and here's what makes this car so special. It represents this beautiful moment in automotive history when GM Canada was willing to offer performance in their luxury flagship, economics damned. This wasn't about practicality. This was about giving buyers the option of power, even if gas prices meant most would never take it. Curiosity loop. So now you might be wondering, did this combination actually work? Was the 348 any good in the heavy Parisienne? And what happened to this unique formula after 1958? So here's the thing about the 1958 Pontiac Parisienne with the 348. It worked. The 348 had torque for days, which meant this big, heavy luxury cruiser could move off the line smartly despite its weight. It wasn't a drag racer. This was still a luxury barge with all that chrome and plush interior, but it had authority. It had presence. When you mashed the throttle, things happened. And that deep Chevrolet V8 rumble, pure automotive poetry. But this combination was short-lived. The 348 continued as an option through subsequent years, but the unique nature of these early Canadian Pontiacs would eventually fade. By the mid-1970s, Canadian and American Pontiacs were essentially the same cars. So what we have here is a snapshot of a very specific moment in automotive history when Canadian Pontiacs were their own distinct breed, when Chevrolet was experimenting with new engine architecture, and when GM was willing to create these beautiful oddball combinations. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm usually not a fan of 1958 General Motors styling. The Oldsmobiles, overstyled. The Buicks, especially that Limited, just awful with all that chrome pot metal trim, way over the top. But the Pontiac is one of the most beautiful cars GM produced in 1958. That rocket form body side, that immensely long nose, that authoritative front end, it all works together despite being loaded with chrome. And the Parisienne sits at the top of that lineup, representing the absolute best of what Canadian Pontiac could offer. American luxury, Chevrolet reliability, and enough style to stop traffic. These cars are rare survivors for good reason. Gas was expensive, optional engines were uncommon, and Canadian cars in general don't show up in American collections very often. Finding one with the 348? That's genuinely special. This is automotive history that most people don't even know exists. A parallel universe where Pontiac wore Chevrolet's heart proudly, where luxury and performance met in unexpected ways, and where Canadian buyers got something truly unique. So what do you think about the 1958 Pontiac Parisienne? And more specifically, what do you think about this bizarre factory combination? Pontiac's flagship luxury car, powered by Chevrolet's first-year experimental V8. Would you take this copper beauty with the 348? Or would you go for that stunning two-tone green example with the economical six-cylinder we looked at? Here's my take. In 1958, if I had the money, I'd absolutely spring for the 348. Yeah, gas was expensive. Yeah, it was impractical. But you'd have one of the most unique combinations GM ever offered. A car that represents this wild moment when the corporate bean counters stepped aside and let engineers do something genuinely cool. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you daily drive a Canadian Pontiac? Have you ever even seen one in person? Let me know. And if you loved this deep dive into automotive oddities that most people don't even know exist, smash that subscribe button because we've got plenty more weird and wonderful automotive history coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.